The future is here already. It's just not evenly distributed. Yet. Today's world teems with innovation. The nexus of hardware, software, and human ingenuity promises a revolution in possibilities. What does tomorrow look like? Witness Future Proof.
The exciting new role in the C-suite is the Chief Data Officer. All around the world, companies are hiring CDOs to manage their information strategy. This is critical for both regulations and compliance, but also for going forward and coming up with new ways to redesign business and innovate. In this episode of Future Proof, we talk with a company called Okira that's paving the way. And with that, let me hand it off to Nong Lee, co-founder of Okira. Nong, the floor is yours. Take it away.
Great. Thank you so much for that. It's very, very aligned with how we think about the world. Can you see my screen okay?
I sure can.
It's like we can. Awesome. Yeah, so just a little bit about myself. My background is building some of these data systems in the past, where we saw firsthand some of the challenges that we just talked about. And exactly, we feel that empowering data governance and dynamic policies is how we can help enterprises move faster, do more with their data, really empower that CDO to be strategic, as you talked about. So kind of our view of the world, very similar to that overall ecosystem landscape map, is that the enterprise data platform is complex, and if there's one thing I would bet on, it's going to get increasingly more complex. And it's complex for a variety of reasons. I think early on we talked a lot about kind of the scale and variety of the data, but as we look at it across the entire organization, it's really that combination of technologies, right? Storage technologies, compute technologies. It is, of course, the data, its volume, it's the use cases that continue to emerge, right? Machine learning is certainly on the rise, that regulatory pressure that's driving it, and then matching the needs of the users. And really, the enterprise data platform has many, many stakeholders. And I totally agree that kind of that strategic CDO is the one who's going to get all of this together to help the organization move as fast as possible. What we see across our customers and users that we talk to is that fundamental tension that you brought up, right? That castle and dungeon metaphor is really apt. And it's really this tension between the data consumers that typically, look, they're going to be productive for the organization if they can move faster, use the best of breed tools, use that specialized database, get that most unique value prop for the organization. And at the same time, we got to balance the needs of proper governance, whether it's from regulation or just an intrinsic value of privacy and those kind of concerns. And this tension, we feel, is actually a false one, right? We think that there is a fundamental way to solve this in the platform technology that lets you have both, right? For example, better brakes on the car or seatbelts don't slow you down. They actually let you drive faster. And that's kind of our fundamental approach to solving that problem, right? We believe through and through that having the right governance and access controls built from the beginning actually lets you deploy and scale up much faster. So the lack of secure data access is quite the bottleneck that manifests in all parts of the organization, right? As the data strategy is organization wide, and without, so kind of the punchline would be, without dynamic data masking, it manifests as pain or really high friction across all of them, right? So with prior solutions, data governance and privacy teams are typically just simply do not have the tools to do what they need. They can't express the policies that they need to. Changing them is incredibly high friction for the entire organization. For data owners and data stewards, they want to empower their users to have access, but this provisioning process is so laborious, it's so error prone, it takes so much time that they feel often swamped. Prior solutions also tend to be quite IT heavy. So we've seen versions where you are making replicas of databases for different development teams. You are making copies via data transformation and ETL pipelines. You're carefully provisioning kind of that moat around your data to give to downstream consumers. And those are all extremely technically intensive tasks, which often fall on IT, and they feel like the bottleneck. And then lastly, yeah, that dungeon metaphor, exactly right. The data analysts and data scientists feel this firsthand, right? We've heard very many stories where data science teams are in months iteration to get access to new data sets, which is extremely challenging, right? When you're doing exploratory work, like you would for data science workloads, and you're not sure if the data set you have access to is the one that has the golden nugget, right? And that kind of iteration is, yeah, certainly very demoralizing and also extremely time consuming. So if we think about this from a policy enforcement and data access management, right, this set of combination is both complex, but in the context of policies, it causes a very, very big explosion in the number of policies an organization needs to think about to have proper data governance. It's essentially all of these things multiplied together that make the systems scale in a way that's quite untenable, right? So as more users scale with diverse access levels, that makes things worse. As regulations come in, that makes things worse. As new use cases come in, again, those kind of things. And we feel kind of the traditional ways of solving this without the dynamism that's required is a mismatch, right? It causes way too much complexity to manage, and that's the problem that we're trying to solve at Okera. So there are a few use cases for these that range from enabling organizations to make quite dramatic changes to their data infrastructure, right? So kind of things that we'll traditionally help companies with is helping you identify and just protect your sensitive and PII data, right, to meet those regulatory needs. We can help you give more agility to your overall data infrastructure as you start embracing cloud and other new data processing technologies. And then, of course, to address the emerging regulatory needs and giving you that flexibility and control, right? Clients that we have worked with that have been with us for a few years, we've just observed firsthand how their policy requirements have changed, right? How we interpret GDPR and exactly what's required for privacy evolve, and having that dynamic control where you can make one change and then see it immediately go into effect has been greatly accelerating for their business. So for us to solve this problem, right, so we have two problems here. We have the policy explosion tendency, so we got to find a way to resolve that. And then we need to be able to enforce the policies dynamically, instantaneously in this very diverse technology ecosystem. So, our point of view is these are the two fundamental platform technology problems that need to be solved to keep this thing under control. There to minimize the number of policies that the organization needs to manage, and then as well as split up the responsibility between the different stakeholders, the different data practitioners, so that you can scale this practice out and make sure that you can grow as your data uses grow. So the first for us is attribute-based access control. So it's up-leveling how you think about policy management, doing it more on logical and semantic properties rather than the physical ones that the database dictates. The second is dynamic policy enforcement. This means that you can change a policy and immediately see it go into effect, no ETL, no latency. It obviously promotes iteration and experimentation and kind of that requirement. And then thirdly is a concept that we've seen work really, really well, and it's distributed stewardship. And that's really all about, again, taking that, the data access and governance set of responsibilities and splitting that out into the organization so the people who are best suited for the work are enabled to do so. So attribute-based access control, it's all about up-leveling how you think about policies, and they map much better to business requirements, right? If you look at a rule like HIPAA or GDPR or things like that, they're expressed to the effect of users that don't want their email used for analytics should have their email addresses anonymized a particular way, right? That kind of higher level business requirement. And attribute-based access control exactly lets you express that. So for us, what that means is we can combine attributes about the user, so meaning we understand where they are in the organization, what title they have, what department they work in, who they report to, so on and so forth. That stuff that's typically already stored in systems like identity systems like Active Directory and so on and so forth. We combine that with attributes we can understand about the data, right? So again, this is kind of up-leveling it from the physical schema to does this column contain PII? or does this column contain email addresses or street addresses, so on and so forth. Or just general context about the data, right? Was this data produced in Germany, right? Where is its sovereignty? When was it produced? Things like that. And then attributes about the environment. So user's IP address, time of day, what kind of application are they in? Are they coming from behind the firewall? So on and so forth. So these higher level constructs, right? These attributes, and these feed into our policy engine. And this lets us express many, many more policy permutations compared to the prior approach much more simply. So if you look at an example, sort of we have at the bottom, is I can express higher level logic that says grant all analysts access to everything that's say tagged non-sensitive, and then transform anything that is say PII, marked PII, with a de-identification function, right? So with a single rule, I can govern across different users, different storage systems, different database technologies, so on and so forth. So it's kind of a specific example that contrasts the two. So what you see in the left, very traditional way of solving this problem. So in this case, you can see I'm creating roles that map to specific roles in the organization, right? So we see analyst and director that also map to specific countries because I need to implement a data sovereignty requirement, right? So I'm making one per country, and you can already see how this explosion is going to happen. And this is because we're really creating policies that are specific, right? Specific to the country, specific to the user. Whereas in the right, with ABAC, you can define one policy that's going to govern all users, right? So anybody with an analyst tag is going to get this policy, and then anything tagged as PII is going to get tokenized. So a single policy greatly reducing that complexity. So kind of ABAC is that first building block to manage this complexity. The second one is all about dynamic policy enforcement, right? So the goal we want to have is you can set policies, you can change policies, you can bring in new tools without having to do a ton of high latency work that would be required if it was statically managed, right? So statically managed for us, we usually think of that as I'm going to ETL that single source of truth into many different variants that are suitable for each use case. And then I'm going to be feeling quite a bit of pain when something about the source changes, right? Either the policies change, or I need to make a new copy, or its schema evolves, or all kind of the natural things that are inevitably going to happen. So with Okera, every data policy is done dynamically. So meaning I, as a user, I could log in from my favorite BI tool or big data tool, or it doesn't really matter. And I'm going to say, I need to read this particular data set. From this point, it's going to come into our engine, and we're going to dynamically decide, yes, you can see it and it's clear, all good. No, can't see it at all. Or yes, you can see it, but subject to these transformations that have been applied, right? So it can be, you can see it, but only in your region. Or you can see it, but then credit card numbers must be have their first few digits masked. And the way we have designed our enforcement engine works with the ecosystem, but we enforce it all dynamically, right? Meaning there's a single source of truth, different users reading it are going to see the dynamic data transformations that are specific and appropriate to them. So this is critical for agility, right? Because any of the static approaches and derived copies are going to be cannot adapt to changes to the environment. And then the third concept that we advocate for that our product enables is distributed stewardship. So there's two concepts here. The first is about delegating responsibility. So if we think about a typical set of roles in an organization, we are going to have experts who are policy experts, right? They understand the business requirements, they understand the legal contracts. They're the closest to being able to interpret the privacy regulations as they change, but they may not be experts on exactly what the organization has stored, right? The contents in the tables. They may not be SQL, or I would say rarely would they be sort of IT and distributed systems experts. So they're the data stewards, policy experts. Then we're going to have a set of people at the organization that are experts on the data. These are typically the product owners, right? That know what the applications are storing, things like that, and really best suited to tell you what the contents of the data are. And then we have central IT, who really should be sort of managing the systems at scale versus individual policies and things like that. So being able to push that policy management responsibility into the organization is what we mean by delegation. And then the second concept we have for this is replication. So what we see through and through with large organizations is they have multiple business units, right, that all embrace different technologies, right, some amount of central IT decisions, and then some that are specific to the businesses or the lines of business. And really what we want to enable for them is, as the CDO's sort of strategic vision permeates throughout the organization, the different teams in the organization should learn from one another. And so what we see in practice, for example, is one line of business that's focused on HR data is going to set up a policy a particular way. And then the next business unit might be the finance team or the manufacturing team or the R&D team. And we should have a way that lets them learn and leverage the learnings from one another. So kind of visually, right, delegate is pushing it down to the people who are more closer to the work, removing that central bottleneck, and then replicating it so that the organization can continue to move even faster, taking advantage of learnings from other teams. So that's about sort of how we think about policy management and how to scale that out. If you think about kind of the Okera platform overall and sort of where we see ourselves in the overall ecosystem, right, all of those kind of different technologies, is we are the policy management and policy enforcement system that integrates with that entire ecosystem. So kind of very close integration for us are things that provide us those attributes, that context that I described to help us have richer policies. So these are business catalogs that are going to provide us with additional metadata. It's going to be the identity systems that help us provide information about users. And you see sort of the typical set of analytics technologies that we support, right, kind of consistent with that. There's kind of a fit-for-purpose database or a fit-for-purpose storage technology, and certainly across our customer base, we see them use that entire variety to great effect. So across all of these tools, we provide that dynamic, centralized, kind of single pane of glass policy authoring and system, and then dynamic enforcement that helps us make sure we're getting the right kind of performance and all of those kind of things as we do the data enforcement requirements. And then there are really some key use cases and abilities that this enables, right? So kind of that single source of truth, expressive, high-level data policy and access control. That's really central to our belief. And then some of the other benefits from this is, single copy, right? That's really core to us. Single copy of the source data. Different users see dynamic views, and then the ability to actually hot swap between different sources, right? So you do have all of those different databases and data technologies that are great at what they do. Sometimes you don't know up front, or you want to experiment with new ones, and being able to swap those in without that being an entire governance rigmarole is extremely helpful. And then, kind of I would say one of the key things, that needs to be solved, right? First is how do we reduce the number of policies? And then second is how do we actually do the dynamic enforcement in a way that is scalable, does not impact performance, and doesn't compromise sort of the good qualities of the technologies that we're providing access control for. So we've been building up a few different access enforcement patterns that really fit this entire landscape. So I think one way to think about it overall is the different technologies that need access control have widely different capabilities. So you see a few examples here where you might have storage systems like Amazon S3, you might have query technologies like Athena, or data warehousing technologies like Snowflake. And those have different trade-offs and different intrinsic capabilities on what they're able to do. On the compute side, you see equally high variety, right? You're going to have very, very sophisticated scale-out compute systems like Databricks, or just end user BI tools, say like Tableau, or data science sort of end user on their development machine, say with Python notebooks and things like that. So what that's highlighting is just a huge matrix of capabilities in those data processing technologies, right? If you think about that matrix and compute capability and storage capability, they provide an interesting problem for unified access control to sort of get the best way to do it, even in a very, very diverse tool space. So that's what these 4 patterns do. So we have very different techniques depending on what's possible in the storage layer and what's possible in the compute layer, so that we can provide access control in the most sort of cost-effective, high performance, so on and so forth way. So yeah, depending on what they do, we're able to do those differently. Certainly happy to dive deeper here. And then kind of to end, I want to just go over one of the case studies with one of the customers that we've had who we've really enjoyed working with over the years. And I think they're a perfect example of how what was initially a CDO-driven initiative for privacy, right, a regulatory need, really helped them build this building block into the data platform that lets them adopt non-governance, non-privacy like use cases much faster, right? Kind of getting this discipline in early really let them solve other use cases. And that's absolutely our philosophy, right? The governance and centralized management of these kind of things should really enable those end data users. So in this case, we started working with them in 2017, and the primary motivation was regulation, right? Dutch Privacy Act, DPA, which you can think of as the predecessor for GDPR. And when they initially engaged with us, they had a very static approach to solving this problem, meaning OpEx and CapEx to create derived copies of those core data sets that they needed to use. Very, very expensive to build. And they literally did this for a handful of their data sets, right? The ones that had the most, that were sort of in the most violation or potential violation of this requirement. And then they realized, oh my God, there's thousands more of these data sets that we would need to protect. This is not the right way. So that's where we helped them and immediately added our dynamic data governance capabilities to solve this problem. And the use cases here for them initially were a lot of the traditional kind of big data core reporting kind of reporting style pipelines. If we fast forward to 2018, I think this really highlights the value of this dynamic approach. Is one, right, supporting their entire data estate, right? So all of their hundreds of thousands of data sets, and then their interpretation of the regulatory requirement change, right? GDPR went into full effect. It has different rules, some stricter, some more broader, right? And we were able to essentially reconfigure the policies with no impact to end users to be able to implement this new privacy requirement. And at the same time, onboarding more use cases with ease, right? So instead of just the kind of the traditional big data reporting, adding a more advanced data science and interactive analytics, and then certainly be able to open this platform up to significantly more users, right? An order of magnitude more users, and working on different end user use cases. And as we fast forward to late last year and heading into today, I don't think we've seen the end of what the regulatory and privacy requirements are going to be, right? So we already talk about more advanced privacy techniques like differential privacy, like anonymization. The impact of ML on privacy, I think, is probably going to be an open topic that all of us have to wrestle with in the coming years. And again, having that dynamic way of treating data privacy very, very much helps. And then certainly, as we think about how their platform has evolved and sort of lining up with that strategic CDO thinking, is now when they onboard new tools and new users, don't really have to think about governance and privacy, right? Those become the easy parts of how to get new use cases and new data onboarded, which is the way it ought to be, right? That governance framework should help you speed up your business. So this is an example of how sort of the privacy rules have evolved for this particular customer, and also how this has impacted the evolution of their overall data platform. So kind of just kind of some closing thoughts for us and how we think about it is that data strategy, particularly around governance and security, is really a company-wide effort, right? It's not, well, yes, driven by the CDO. I think a successful solution needs enrollment from everybody, and then the tooling should make it so they want to be enrolled, right? It shouldn't make it so difficult that they find ways to work around it. And then is as much as a technology solution as it is an organizational one, right? Again, with all of these different stakeholders, the way to think about this has to line up with them. And then some of the things we've seen work really, really well in practice is that crawl, walk, run approach, demonstrating value of the governance solution, of the overall data strategy, of the data platform, and then carrying whatever learnings going forward. I think we're all learning as the ecosystem evolves quite quickly. And then I think, as we think about it from sort of our point of view, we definitely are seeing quite a bit of commonality across organizations that we work with. Some of those are vertically aligned, right? FinTech thinks about things a particular way, or healthcare and pharma. So as we think about what we can do from our side, how do we carry those learnings across organizations? So with that, thank you.
That's excellent. Yeah, if you would put up one of those architectural slides, so we can kind of go through that, and I'm sure we'll get some attendees asking questions here. First question that comes to my mind is with respect to data catalogs. On the next slide, you've got Calibra and Alation off to the side, and obviously these are very powerful technologies for helping really make sense of highly diverse data environments. Well, how does Okera actually integrate with those folks? What is the level of integration? What's the layer of integration? Can you talk to that for a minute or two?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say overall, both kinds of technologies, right, us and those, benefit from having as much metadata available as possible. That's certainly our belief, and we strongly believe that's their point of view as well. So what we integrate with them there is those attributes that I talked about on the data, right? So where our platform is focused on is automation of deriving those kind of things. So we're able to scan extremely large data lakes and data platforms and detect what are the things that email, PII, various kinds, things like that. And we sync those tags with Calibra and Alation. So our APIs talk together. So whatever we find automatically can be synced there. And where they are really, really strong is to provide kind of that end user experience for curating, for approving that tags are good, or to provide additional information that you simply would never be able to find by scanning, right? So like, what company do we buy this data set from? Things like that. And then those attributes, data attributes, are then synced back to us and can drive our policy decisions. Right. So for example, you could create a policy in us that says analyst shouldn't see data that's procured by this vendor, right? That's not in our legal contract. We can't do it. And if those tags are managed in a system like Calibra, then you get that dynamic, and that whole dynamism that we've been talking about. So the compliance folks and say, yep, this data set is, we bought it from this particular vendor with that tag applied. Now it can either make it visible or invisible, depending on how the policy is set.
Yeah, that's a great story. And yeah, I remember looking up that you worked on Spark and you worked on Impala. So you've been at the forefront of some of the coolest innovation in the data space. And I'm just very excited about this because, again, it's the seatbelt for analytics. Basically, it allows you to drive faster, to drive into new terrain, to really do whatever you want with those guardrails in place, with that governance in place. So folks, hop online to learn more about these guys, okera.com. We do archive all these webinars for later viewing. It's fun to go back and see where we were a year or two ago. I think this is a whole new space that's opening up, and it's really an enabling technology that's going to let you take full value or get full value from your analytics investments. With that, we're going to bid you farewell, folks. Thank you, Nong, for a great presentation today. Fantastic slides. We'll catch up to you next time, folks. Take care. Bye-bye.